Hi. I'm really excited to have you all here. Thanks for coming to our panel on the privacy landscape, state and local perspectives. I'm Sarah Carrier. I am the City of Seattle's Privacy and Responsible AI Program Manager, and I'm going to be moderating, if you can't tell. So really excited to have you guys here today. Appreciate you taking the time on a Tuesday evening in downtown Seattle. Thank you very much. So today we're going to be discussing the privacy landscape and kind of how it's evolved over the last X amount of years, 10 years or so. Hopefully you'll have questions, you'll learn a little bit, and you'll feel inspired to continue to engage with the fine folks on the panel and also your privacy offices at the state and local level. So hopefully, this will be a great event for you guys. A few logistics. There are note cards and pens. If you have questions, you can just jot them down on the note cards and put them over on the table, and we'll collect them at the end, and we can have about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A for folks. So we'll try to see how much time we have, but we can definitely get to those questions. I'd love to just go ahead and start. Come join us. Hi. Introducing our panelists here. We have Ginger Armbruster, Zack Hudgins, and Katy Ruckle. And I would just, if we can, go down the line. I'll let you guys do an introduction, tell us a little bit about yourselves, who you are, and we'll start with Ginger.
Hello, and thank you all. Can you all hear me okay? Did I do that all right? Okay, I did the first thing right tonight. That's good. I got the button turned on. I'm Ginger Armbruster. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer for the City of Seattle. Been in role, and we've had a program going here for a better part of a decade. So I don't know, how many people were aware that we've had a privacy program that's run that long? Is that new news for many? All right. I came to the city as an intern. I was a mid-career change professional and had an opportunity to build this program, take a little time out to go to Microsoft and learn about privacy at the private sector, and then came back and have been enrolled as Chief Privacy Officer since. And I'm really happy to be here because it's Privacy Day and we get to talk about what we do with people that are interested in hearing more. And I'm very much interested in hearing questions you might have about our program.
I'm Zack Hudgins. I'm a privacy manager for the state of Washington. I work for the Office of Privacy and Data Protection for our Chief Privacy Officer, Katy Ruckle. And I do a lot of work with local governments, and I do a lot of work in the overlap between privacy and cybersecurity. So folks are kind of more aware of cybersecurity these days, but you get a twofer when you do some of the privacy work. It's also in line with requirements and needs of the cybersecurity discipline. And so we're seeing more and more of a split between those two as they develop and mature kind of in both of those areas. But that's a lot of the work I spend my time on.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Katy Ruckle, and I'm the state's Chief Privacy Officer. I have been lucky enough to work for the state for 18 years now and 5 years in my current role. And I am technically in statute the director of the Office of Privacy and Data Protection. And I have Zack to be grateful for that he helped get that office created in law when he was a legislator. So it's been fantastic to have Zack on my team and get all of the history there, but then also have enjoyed working with Ginger over the years too in terms of how the state and local governments work together. So excited to be here tonight.
Yes, and we're excited to have you all. Thank you. Before we launch into questions, I want to just kind of set the stage a little bit. Ginger, I think you referenced it. It's been about 10 years since the City of Seattle has started our privacy program. So 2025 is our 10-year anniversary. And I think the States is coming up pretty quickly here too. Next
2026, we're just a year behind you.
Yeah, so really, really close. And things have changed a lot in the privacy space over the last 10 years. And that's some of what we're going to talk about today. But, privacy has kind of become its own separate discipline in that time. We have professionals from all different domains, from legal to compliance to software development and engineering, right? And I mean, I bet, if I were to ask you about privacy enhancing technologies or pets 10 years ago, you probably would have raised your hand and told me about your cat or your dog, right? Maybe some of you still will. I mean, I don't know. Not after today, though. But I think a lot of that change that we've seen over time has really been driven by laws and regulation globally. So thinking about things over time that have happened to really drive the domain and the discipline forward around the general data protection regulation in the EU, and then I think it's around 20 or so state comprehensive privacy laws that we have around the United States right now. And I think that's really put privacy on the map as a separate domain, and that's some of the change that we've been really seeing. So I guess just kind of, starting there, I guess I would like y'all's opinion on how you guys have seen the privacy landscape change over the last, 10 years, 15 years or so. And if that's specific to here in Washington, great, or even just more broadly. So Zack or whoever wants to start.
Thank you. So I'll start a little bit further back, but I'll move very quickly. 100 years ago, when people talked about privacy, it was thought about as sort of the right to be left alone. A problem that we would recognize today was that Chief Justice Brandeis's daughter had a wedding, and a bunch of the paparazzi took pictures of the wedding, and he got bent out of shape about it and sort of formed up our modern day of privacy, of the right to be left alone. If you think about where things were 50 years ago, as computers and big databases started to be formed, the federal government adopted their first privacy laws and the first principles around that data and how it should be used in a mutual beneficial way. So the folks that had the data and then the subjects of that data, it should benefit both sides of that. If you look back 10 years ago, the Office of Privacy and Data Protection in Washington State wasn't created until 2016, so it wasn't even around in practice in Washington State. And when it was created in 2016, we were the second state, I think, to have an official office and everything. And at the time, it was one person, and they were largely focused on consumer privacy, which is important, and it's still part of our mandate. But it wasn't as structural or sort of framework, right? It wasn't about building out towards that maturity. If you look at where we were just in the last year, we've built out at the state level privacy principles, a privacy framework. We've got 5 years of data of surveys across the state agencies, across the enterprise of where we are. We've celebrated Data Privacy Day. We've sort of plugged into other states and what they're doing. If you look at sort of where we were just a day ago, I mean, this is how much it's sort of accelerated, where the discussion about privacy and AI is in the news everywhere, with DeepSeek and pop-ups on people's computers asking you to accept cookies, and a discussion of GDPR and health data. And people really have a different sort of vision and understanding of privacy now, and about the interaction with data, and about consumer companies, and about government, and about who's got the data, and is it correct, and can I correct it, and can I delete it? No, I can't delete it. What's the transparency policy? What's the accountability of all this? So that's sort of some of the arc of going from just leave me alone to now is about what's this relationship about data and how does it interact with the individuals.
I can add a little. So 10 years ago when we started talking about privacy, it really was around surveillance technologies. That's where the conversation started. I think this understanding that cities are collecting a lot of information, and there's a need to do some of that in protection of part of public safety, property protection. And when I would speak to people about privacy, everyone had a different view, and probably still do to some extent, about what they mean. And so I'd be in front of groups and I'd say, if you had a list of 10 data points, which are more important, where would you draw the line about what is important to you in terms of privacy? And for some, it'd be financial data. Others would be my image. Others would be like anything I do behind a closed door ought to have no room in the public space. But everybody had a slightly different view. And they might have a different view if you asked about yourself and then you asked about their kids, or about your mom, or about another relative who might be more vulnerable and maybe not as tech savvy. So I think I've seen a real evolution in terms of a better understanding of all the permutations of data. And the other thing I think I can mention is the conversation about data privacy, I think for all of us, has morphed a bit to encompass more of the ethics of data use, the understanding of what should we be doing. And I don't want to jump ahead in some of the questions we're going to get to, but AI plays a place in that. What can we do, what should we be doing, and what do we need to be aware of? Because as we often know, technology can be unleashed before we're quite ready for all the unintended consequences. And so our office has encompassed other issues beyond just data privacy, which now feels operationalized in many ways. And we are way more than one or two chief privacy officers across the country. I remember that too. We were the very first municipal privacy program, really, I think, in the nation that I was aware of. And it was lots of fun to build, but it was also kind of lonely. It was sort of me and the SharePoint guy. How can we come up with, some information? And I had to get his time sort of allocated, and it was sort of me and him, and that was it. Now we have a team of 4 who are focused, and so the evolution it continues. And I think as we have new technologies coming up, new things to think about in terms of data use, and as our awareness grows, I think we'll continue to see it do that. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I would say for my perspective on the evolution of privacy is really through my career that I've been at the state, because my first intersection with privacy really, because I'm an attorney, I have a legal background, and it was really around HIPAA and health data. And so I was also doing contracts at the time and was doing business associate agreements, which also then brought me into working with cybersecurity. And so that's where I really started seeing, I think, a parallel to sort of where we are with privacy today to what happened with cybersecurity. Because now, cybersecurity is a given almost in any organization, and a lot of resources and time go into making sure everything is secure. And I kind of feel like there was this awakening, 10 to 15 years ago, really focusing, building our maturity on cyber, and then cyber started to become more aware of getting all these privacy questions, and they were like, we need somebody that has a privacy background and the discipline on privacy. And so that's where I've seen the landscape, at least in the professional field, and seen it mature across industry and I think in the government.
And I can add just one more thing on the cyber question. Early on, if it was a privacy question, our cyber people kind of say, oh, yeah, it's over there. Go talk to them over there. I don't know what that is. That's something else. I think now, and we would kind of talk about, we never go anywhere without our cyber buddy, kind of like if you are a diver, never go anywhere without your buddy, right? I think we've seen that shift to more of a partnership and more of an understanding of the roles each of us play. We can't have privacy without security. And I think security is also recognizing the role that we play to help secure systems. So anyway.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So I want to kind of tease apart. Zack, you started mentioning this, the concept of privacy in the consumer space. And I kind of am interested. I mean, obviously, there's a bunch of public sector folks up here, right? So I'm kind of interested in what's the nexus between consumer privacy and privacy in the public sector. Like, how do you guys view that overlap, or where are they different, and how are your teams thinking about those things?
Right. So I would say for our perspective, we look at the laws that apply across both in private sector and public sector. I mentioned HIPAA. We look at, FERPA as the educational privacy law, and then, GLBA for finance, and IRS 1075. And those are the laws that we're looking at a lot from the government side in terms of making sure we're doing all of the compliance pieces. But we do get asked as well about some of the rights that come with the consumer privacy laws. And that's where Zack mentioned some of those principles, the FIPS, right? The Fair Information Practice Principles, which we use to create the Washington State Agency privacy principles. And then those are baked into many of the consumer laws that we see in terms of transparency and accountability, due diligence, security, lawful, fair, and responsible use, all these kind of ethical things that Ginger was talking about. But how I try to talk to our state agencies, especially about what's happening on the consumer side of privacy laws, is to be ready and be thinking about adopting those practices at our agencies as well, because we're trying to align them. So there are some laws that don't necessarily apply to us in the government, but we still look at those principles and incorporate them in terms of our handling of personally identifiable information.
I had a chance to speak with some other chief privacy officers at an event in Washington, D.C., and one of the CPOs was from the state of Utah. Also have a 100-year history in privacy, but mostly around religious privacy and the right of individuals to have privacy of their own beliefs, and a lot of that was the start of Utah. And it was the first state CPO I'd met that did not focus on consumer as much as they focused on personal government type tension between information and privacy. And it was really eye-opening to see a different perspective. We have spent a lot of time on consumer privacy, which does not apply to what we do, although here in the city of Seattle, we are focusing on how we protect people's information, privacy for information of the individual. And it's interesting when they do intersect with a general understanding that we all have a tolerance and a place where we're saying, wait a minute, how is data being used? And in many ways, and we're going to get to this in a few minutes, I think at the consumer level, it's almost a little easier to protect data and to be aware of how data is being collected. And I think some of that is due to the EU and GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which has led the way in consumer privacy in some ways, pulling it together so it's not a state-by-state argument. But it's interesting to see how that has developed over time.
What's interesting to me is that individuals are the same whether they interact with the government or with sort of the consumer space, with the private sector. And so as we lay out these principles, I think about how attitudes change, but the laws can change those attitudes on the expectations of what they think of as privacy. And the example I think about is that there was a time when folks said, hey, we have these interactions, let's collect as much data as we can on folks, and maybe we'll use it later. And so we have a principle about, minimization. You should only collect what you need. And then purpose limitation. So you should only use it for what you say you're going to use it for. And so that attitude, that expectation is that if we're going to use it for something else, we have to go ask, can we use it for something else? Mm-hmm. And so that relationship hopefully will bleed out into the private sector a little bit. And it's difficult when your data can bounce through multiple private sector entities or go through data brokers, and it gets harder to keep track of who's got your data and what they're doing with it. But the principles will still apply, and those expectations will still apply, and it's a great place to see where the government can be the model through the principles. And they're not new. Again, they've been around for 50 years. I think that the European Union, with their General Data Protection Regulation, their GDPR, has really kind of heightened awareness of it. But the expectation and those principles have been around for a very long time. And they're kind of worked out that people agree to them. And so that's a great place of watching the government space influence that sort of private sector consumer space a little bit.
Absolutely. I'm remembering when we first stood up our privacy program, it was very interesting to me, realizing early on what we are ready to give up in the consumer space for convenience or fill-in-the-blank service, or for expanding or remembering people I knew in high school, social media. What we are willing to give up is very different than what we feel comfortable with, perhaps with the government data collection. And I remember early on, somebody who was a very, very vocal advocate for privacy in the city and worked very much with the city as we were setting up principles, was on a article, not the front page of that section, wearing Google glasses at the time. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, the amount of information that's being scooped up with that technology, which has probably moved on to other things now, right? We have other versions of it. Does not match what it is the city could possibly collect, but that's different, right? I'm writing off my right to some of that privacy because I want that service, and it's an interesting one to bring up because government has a different role, and it's the unknown, it's the concern, it's the where is it written, where did I agree? Some of what we collect isn't really information folks are choosing necessarily. It's not a service I'm necessarily connecting to. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's public safety or it's health information. We have a different service, different services we provide as government, which changes that arithmetic.
Thanks. Yeah, so principles, expectations, sectoral privacy, a little bit the same, a little bit different, right? And so I want to kind of tease apart a little bit of kind of the worlds I think all of us live in every day. up here around some of the unique challenges that government has in the privacy space that might be a little bit different from the consumer side of things. And that is kind of the natural tension between our Public Records Act and privacy specifically, right? So both rooted in transparency, but very different tacts. So can you talk a little bit about what that looks like and how that plays out with residents or the folks that we serve in the work that we do on a daily basis?
Yes, so the Public Records Act here in the state of Washington, I think goes back to 1974. The idea being you have the right to know what government has on you and you can make that request. I might offer that in 1974 that was probably some file cabinets, some paper records. It's moved apace in the last 50 or so years about just exactly what the nature of those records are. But the law hasn't really changed. And so it's interesting for folks who are very much committed to government transparency to understand what that means for data collection and the ability to protect privacy. Almost everything we collect, with not too many exemptions, maybe there's 20 or so of them, I haven't taken a look recently if they've broader than that, very narrow exceptions can we really redact or make information not available. So pretty much, don't hold me to this and don't write down everything you want to know tomorrow, come running at me with a public records request, but we have to fulfill almost any request we get for data. And really, when you think about it, that's not necessarily everything the government's doing. It's people's information. It's the information that we collect to deliver services. So the tension between public records and the transparency that's designed to provide can really limit what we can do from the privacy perspective. What can I really promise? And that's why I mentioned consumer privacy. They don't have that same thing. Might have subpoenas, or might have other legal means of getting information from a private sector company, but it does make it very interesting. So our conversations are around limiting what you collect. And early on especially, we would sit down and consult with different departments who had mission-driven services and solutions they were coming up with to talk to them about, you don't want all the data you think you want, or at least let's talk about how we might minimize what you're collecting, because here's what could happen on the other end. It can be used for different purposes. People can collect information with different ideas. People may not agree with the business you're running and they may want to harass you about it. Federal government may come from information without you intending for that information to be used the way it may be from a different mission or a different service or different agency from a state or federal government. Data brokers may collect your information or may be able to collect information through public records equivalent and be able to request information that we didn't intend to be used for the ways marketing, other things, other outreach. So it puts a different spin on how we manage and hopefully make people aware of what it is they're collecting and how it may be used. The other side to that is our record retention laws in the state of Washington are very rigid. So people aren't always aware, we have data retention requirements that range from 6 months all the way up to something like 30 years after the last relative in your family passes away. I mean, that's just a huge range of information. Most of it isn't the last one. But, this really means we have to be mindful that we may have to hold on to this stuff for a really long time. And if I can say anything for my colleagues, we are a lot of pack rats. We are afraid to give up information because you just know the minute you let it expire, delete it, that's when someone's going to want it. But we really struggle with those two principles. I happen to have the public records team that supports 100 or so public records officers across the city on my team with my privacy team. And we sit down and talk about our different ways of looking at data and what that means. So it's an education kind of all around. And someday I hope we do look at that old sunshine law to see if there may be some things we want to look at now that we have the ability to collect so much info. We have petabytes of information, petabytes of data at the city, and a petabyte is about 20 million 4-drawer filing cabinets if we were to put them in document form. We have more than 1 petabyte of data, so it's an incredible amount of information, and it really means that not only do we have the public records to worry about, but it can take a really long time to sort through all that. Redact what needs to be redacted, protect what should be protected, but still being transparent. So I hope that gives you a little view into kind of where those tensions arise. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, we have all of those same conversations and tensions. Of course, transparency is a fundamental value that we have, especially in the state of Washington as a part of our government, but then also protecting personal information to the extent that we can by law. And so that's just the line that we cross and sometimes, or the line that we walk. And then I will say, we do get complaints sometimes, and they're privacy complaints about records that have been released, but normally they're public records. I've been asked before about why does Washington State have such open records regarding property ownership? And we just had to explain this is a decision of the state, and this is the information that's available. There have been some protections put around some of that. I think for domestic violence victims and people that have been victims that want to be able to own property without having their name attached to it. And so there is some protections that more recently have been adopted. But really, for a lot of those things, we just explain, like, this is the policy that we have in the state of Washington in terms of transparency. But there are protections for people's, most personal information as well. So I don't know. Do you want to add anything, Zach?
Well, maybe I can add an example, which is that the principles, the privacy principles, as I talk to local governments, were based in Washington State law and practice and culture and everything. So we didn't just pull something off the shelf and throw these principles out there. We looked at our Public Records Act, and we looked at our exemptions, and we sort of, how do we generally do business? And transparency is one of them. I mean, transparency and following the law and giving out the information that's required. And this is a long-held law in Washington State and sort of an ethos of having really open government in Washington State. Now, it costs money, and some folks gripe about it, but it's a good thing in general, right? Sunshine solves problems and everything. But there are also some exceptions to that, and that tension between what's your expectation of privacy, and when should something be sent out or not. And if somebody requests somebody's email, that's pretty standard. I want to see this in your email, and public records officers dig it up and send it out. But if it's more sort of personal information about where do you work, okay, that's also public records. That's not a big deal. But people were also getting birthdays of state employees, and so there had to be a specific exemption passed in law, and it was a bit of a discussion in the state legislature about whether to exempt that one piece of information or not. And it's like, why would the public benefit from getting the birthdays of public employees? And so there is an exemption for that now, and so somebody's like, give me all the information you have on public employees, and the birthday of public employees is not included. So the transparency has limits, and it's a good thing. And if people complain about it, we usually point to the exemptions and say, well, do you have a specific exemption? And if not, then you should talk to the legislature, and there's a process for going to get an exemption put in. So it goes back to this idea of what's mutually beneficial to hold and to work forward on the data and on the information, and then working through what the lawmaking process is, and making sure we respect the will of the voters who passed the Public Records Act as an initiative. And then there's also cost to doing the redaction and cost to maintaining the records, and all of that is wrapped into what people expect should be private and not private. So those are the complaints saying, well, this is the law, we have to make this public. It's like, this shouldn't be public, right? Around the property records would be a good example as well. And at the same time, that information, that data can be used to do businesses and create benefit to the community, and to track trends or other things going on in the community that are beneficial to know about.
They didn't want our birthdays to send us cards. No. No. Anything that can be used to steal somebody's identity, create false records, et cetera, you can understand how that would be part of it. But I like the birthday card idea. I'll plan it out.
Well, and you could request, right, until, I mean, I say relatively recently, my son is like, are you talking 2 years or like 25 years ago? I mean, it wasn't uncommon for people to get Social Security numbers sent out in public records requests, right? And so there is an evolution as we talk about where was privacy and where is it now. And so there's a recognition that maybe we shouldn't be sending Social Security numbers to a foreign country just because they asked, right? Like, let's have a discussion about this. What does the law say? What do we have to do? Same with security protocols, and there's other things, and there are exemptions around that. But the default is always transparency. The default is always to follow the law and to send the records out as required.
I think what you're also mentioning is what Sarah talked about was how do we operationalize privacy, given the amount of data that is out there to be sifted? How do we make sure that information doesn't go out that shouldn't? How do we protect against social security numbers, for example, birth dates, other things that can be used for nefarious purposes? And that is becoming more and more important. So this area of public records has really changed to be highly technical. There's a lot of high tech in there to make sure that we can do the right thing, sift through terabytes of information in some kind of timely way so that a request doesn't take 20 years to respond to for the amount of data that might be sifted.
So what I'm hearing is we are special. Okay. I know we've been talking a lot about the laws in consumer versus public sector and things like that. But I do want to just see if there are any other laws you think might be applicable to let folks know that we have here in the state of Washington, in terms of that folks can walk away with and say, hey, I heard about this thing that could apply to me as an individual and what that might look like. I might be leading the question a little bit in the health data space, but I'll let you guys take it from here. Are there any other laws folks should know about?
So there's a few that we have in the state of Washington, and one of the first, I think, important privacy laws that we have that I think has become more apparent now is our biometrics law in the state of Washington and the requirements for notice and consent for private industry to collect biometrics and use our biometrics. And another important law is the facial recognition law that we have in the state of Washington, and that actually just applies to government agencies, but there's a really strong I would say, philosophy as a part of that law to do community engagement if there's any decisions to use facial recognition. And that includes notice and then ongoing conversations and consultations with the community before making decisions, and then being really transparent about the technology and false positives and those types of things. So it's a pretty I would say, comprehensive law in terms of what a government is expected to do to be able to use that type of technology. And then most recently, you mentioned the data law or the health data law. So last couple years ago, couple sessions, they had My Health, My Data, which has become a very, I think, well-known privacy law for, it's put Washington on the map. And I say that because I have been at a few national conferences and people are like, you're from Washington? Did you have anything to do with My Health, My Data? Because there's a lot of attorneys and companies that are looking very closely at that law and the requirements to treat health data, consumer health data in particular, in a very respectful way, really. And so the pieces of that law that I think are so interesting was it was partially a reaction to the Dobbs decision at the Supreme Court to protect specific reproductive health data. But it was much broader than that, and it was really meant to fill the gap of, I mentioned HIPAA earlier, and a lot of people think that HIPAA applies to all of our health data, but it really only applies to our health data when it's in health care providers or insurance or pharmacy, some sort of covered entity under the law. But all of the devices, I do wear an Apple Watch that collects all of our health data, our Fitbits, and all these devices that we use, or different types of apps we may need or use for our health. This law now applies to that, and there's certain rights that come to that, including your right to ask to see that data, the right to revoke consent from sharing that data, and then also asking companies to be able to delete that data, which is not necessarily a right you have under HIPAA. So it's sort of an interesting piece in terms of the consumer side versus the government side. So I think those are all important laws that we have. And I think the other thing that puts My Health, My Data on the map as well is the fact that it does come with a private right of action, which very few consumer privacy laws have. And I think this is one of the main ones that has that. So,
Yeah.
In fact, the reason we don't have a state privacy law is that private right of action argument, correct? That's one of the many reasons, but that's a hard thing to agree to, right?
That has been a sticking point, I think, for the law in Washington, yes, for a broader privacy consumer law. However, there was a bill dropped today that expands the My Health, My Data to be broader than consumer health data, even though consumer health data is defined very broadly. So we'll see what happens, but it's still a conversation that we're having in the state of Washington. Yeah.
So more to come. Yes. See you guys next year. Okay.
Can I mention, so you're talking about
Yeah,
like consumer,
absolutely.
and Katie mentioned some of these, but there's many federal protections that apply, of course, to Washington State. And Katie mentioned educational as FERPA, the finance stuff is Graham-Leach-Bliley, so GLBA, and HIPAA, of course, is healthcare, which is, if I'm at a cocktail party and they say, what do you do? I say, I work for the state. Oh, what do you do for the state? And I always reference HIPAA. I have nothing to do with HIPAA or healthcare, generally speaking, but people know that HIPAA has protections for them. And so I say, well, I kind of do like HIPAA stuff for everything else. You know, I mean, like it's a point of reference. And I think HIPAA was passed in about 1996, right? So pre-internet boom, pre-data collection boom, pre-big data boom. But people know that there's protection there. And so HIPAA's for healthcare, we got education. And then there are other federal laws as well as the Federal Privacy Act that protect Washington State consumers. And then we see the marketplace shifting because other states have passed what they would call comprehensive data privacy, or California has. And so we see some consumers getting the benefits of a California law or a Virginia law or other places. And then there's a continuing discussion, whether it's in our state or at the federal level, about sort of standardizing those and trying to figure out what can we agree on protections for data, on use of data, on access and rights to data. And that's why I kind of keep pointing back to our privacy principles, because it's a great place to find agreement, right? Like if you're looking for a discussion, where do we start in agreement that we can move out for? How do we operationalize this framework? How do we operationalize these principles? How do we operationalize best practices that have been in place, maybe in other states or at the federal government for 20 or 30 or 50 years?
I think also, I was at Microsoft for 2 years when the GDPR was somehow being operationalized, and they were in a panic over there. How in the world are we going to do this? Well, the answer was we're going to do one thing. So I don't know what the United States is going to land on in terms of federal law if we ever get there, but the one thing we do know is we want to work internationally. Therefore, GDPR becomes a standard. And that idea of having kind of a baseline, which is pretty high bar, it's not a low bar, did help with a lot of large international companies. So we have seen some bleed over for privacy where we can't quite get it together on a federal basis, but you know what? We do have some international precedent that helps companies target one approach. Yeah.
And Washington's
GD, the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, is a EU, a European, and more set of regulations about protecting consumer law and gives you rights around your own information.
I was just going to say that Washington State is leading the discussion in the other Washington. Kathy McMorris Rogers and Maria Cantwell, as Democrat, Republican, House, Senate, have really thrown out a lot of ideas and a lot of discussion, are leading the way to try and find some kind of federal agreement on it. And so, like, here we are in Washington State, we're leading the nation in implementing our privacy office, in municipalities setting up their privacy office, in laying out principles that other states are adopting, and our federal legislators are working on it as well, because it's important to folks in Washington State.
More to come indeed. So this has all been so rich in terms of information. I'm kind of wondering, when we all leave here tonight, where can people learn more? I just want to throw this out in the middle of the conversation. Are there resources available that you or your teams have put together or are publicly available where folks can learn more about not only some of these privacy laws, but also what the programs are working on, what those principles are, Zack, those types of things, and how are you guys approaching the resources that are made available to the public?
Well, it's Privacy Week, so it's super easy to find privacy resources right now. And Katy mentioned biometrics. We've got an expert that we're going to talk to about biometrics this week, and we've got some fun games on our site. So you can go to the privacy website at WATEC. So I've got official, I paid for this, okay? It wasn't given to me. I'm a state employee. I had to pay for my own WATEC outfit. But the WATEC is the central state IT agency, and privacy is right up there with security and strategy. You can, if you just go to the WATEC website, you can find all of our Privacy Week activities, including discussions with national, international experts. You can see what we've done in the past. We reference all of the work that we do. All of our webinars are on there. I'll let Katy kind of explain as well what is there, but it's a great resource. And then we share. So if you work for local government and you want sort of best practices, or if you're interested in how to measure privacy or what other states are doing, we've got a lot of those resources either in our webinars or in our papers. Our reports are there, so you can sort of see how the state agencies are doing, or recent AI report that you just worked on is there as well, I believe, right? And so what else would you, I mean, it's all on the website.
Yeah, you could go to privacy.wa.gov. That will get you to the WATEC privacy resources. I would say for the public as well, this was a little bit of an older resource, but one that we put out early days of the pandemic when a lot of the Wi-Fi hotspots were being created. We put out sort of a responsible or things to keep in mind when using public Wi-Fi, and we had that translated into 36 languages. Wow. And so I just double checked, and it is still relevant, most of those tips. So for general public purposes, but otherwise a lot of our resources too are for government agencies, but then also can be interesting watching and learning for other ideas about building privacy programs and those types of things.
And Sarah's responsible for our site, so you can talk a little bit about where to go. We do have a website, and
seattle.gov/privacy.
see, there you go. And we have history of our privacy program, where we came from, how we developed it, principles-based approach, similar to what we saw from our friends in the state. We worked with folks from academia, we worked with the ACLU, we worked with folks in industry to help us build those principles. We also have information about the surveillance ordinance, about responsible artificial intelligence, part of our program. We have all kinds of resources about what laws apply and a little bit of information about these. Do we reference back to the state as well? I haven't looked recently.
Yes, we will.
Yes, we will do that. But anyway, you can find out more about the city. You can find out more about us. We can find out more about Seattle information technology as well. I will say that our chief technology officer is sitting right over there. And so Seattle IT is also a search that you can do and find out a little bit more about information technology at the city. Probably the best thing about where we are now in the 10 years that we've grown, privacy is interweaving into how we acquire technology, how we work on contracts, and weaving that into our awareness. So a lot of information on that website about that journey, and then how to contact us if you have any specific questions that don't get answered today.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. We do have a little bit of time for a couple more questions, perhaps. And what kind of 2025 panel event would this be if we did not talk about the intersection of privacy and AI? So here we go, winding up. What impact do you guys think that the interest in AI that we've seen kind of explode, especially over the last few years, what impact has that had on privacy, the field or the domain in general?
It's had a significant impact on my role in the state. And speaking of chief technology officers, yes. So while I do work closely with our chief information security officer for cybersecurity, I would say right now I probably spend a lot more time with our chief technology officer working on our artificial intelligence initiatives in terms of responsible use and adoption. And we just published, oh my gosh, I think there's 9 different deliverables that were a part of the Governor Inslee's executive order 2401 on artificial intelligence, and we're the lead agency for 4 of those deliverables, and they're now published on our website under our artificial intelligence resources. So Those have just gotten published, and now we're laying the groundwork for adoption and operationalizing those types of risk assessments, and really taking a look at how AI and the intersection of privacy especially are becoming inseparable. I just did an exercise where I looked at 7 different responsible AI frameworks, and privacy is in each one of them. So it's a very strong correlation, and I would say transparency is also in each one of those as well. And so it has really taken over a lot of the work that we're doing in our office right now, but that I feel like the taking on the artificial intelligence side of things too has really, I think, magnified how important it is that privacy work with other disciplines as well, because it's such a multidisciplinary approach that we need to take to adopt this technology responsibly. So it is, security, legal, technological experts, our records people as well. We're having all those conversations at the state.
Awesome.
When I talked about AI as kind of a glitter bomb, it kind of, when it hit the scene and became everywhere all the time, it couldn't get away from the idea of artificial intelligence. It captured our imagination, and we kind of laugh in privacy that every year there's something new. Well, this has been the something new, I think, for the last 2 or 3 years now. There's such an interest in what this technology can do, what problems can it solve, and we have 42 or so departments, depending on the time of year, about 42, in the city of Seattle, and each one has a mission, and each one is interested in how can I do more with my resources, how can I use new technology to help me get where I'm going. So that puts a lot of attention and focus on how information technology all up between security, privacy, other compliance structures, how can we enable that, how can we make that happen. So while our folks are getting super excited and vendors are running all over the place getting people super excited, we're trying to catch up a bit to make sure that we are doing it in a responsible way, and that's why you hear the words responsible artificial intelligence. I think maybe we all heard that most AI, some of those large language models, had gone through the internet and sucked up everything it possibly could to get smart. What's left? Well, all the data maybe we have, all the data that governments have, and some of that information needs to be protected. Critical information, or protected from its individuals whose information is being potentially exposed. So we have those broad conversations about these really big, large language models and how do these solutions need to be responsibly used. City of Seattle was one of the first to come up with a generative AI policy about how we would use generative AI to make sure there's a person in the middle. That's one of the largest parts of this, that we are paying attention to potential bias. We are looking at how these solutions can or cannot be helpful and what they might do to be harmful. So we select carefully and make sure that the solution we are applying them to does not do harm. So while we sound like the downers, we're all very excited about also what artificial intelligence can do to make our lives easier from the privacy front. I talked about all that data for public records. We got to get some artificial intelligence in there to help us make sure those requests can go quickly with the amount of data we have. So many fronts, and it all landed over here in privacy. So Sarah was the one who worked with an external group of folks who were experts in the field to come up with that generative AI policy, and now a general AI policy is next. And then a program that helps our departments who are very mission-driven figure out what solutions are appropriate for what they're using. Rob, my boss here, has made clear I'd like as many solutions made available as we can in a responsible way, and so that's very much a focus of what we're doing. So that it's not only what it can do to help us do our job better, but also how we can enable folks out there in department land, as we like to say, there our internal clients, get what they need. And then finally, I think it is a train that's left the station. Often new technologies kind of get going before we're aware of all the things we should be aware of, so we're staying very much close to our colleagues, making sure we're understanding what can go right and what can go wrong. Has everyone kind of been familiar with when New York City went live with a chat bot and some wrong information got shared? Google that one for a minute, or Bing it. Take a look. What happened is a reliance on information from an AI engine for a chatbot for people to interact and get questions answered, and didn't always give the right answers. As a matter of fact, gave illegal answers occasionally. Those are the things we want to be aware of. We don't want that. We really don't want to be on the front page because we did the wrong thing. We want to be on the front page because we were thoughtful about how we did the right thing. We're having some very productive and good conversations. We have 20, 30 some odd solutions that are already approved in the city for very specific uses. We're looking at how we can make more available all the time. So that's kind of the AI, the glitter bomb that continues, that we are trying to use this technology well. I don't know if anybody's had a chance to use in your area of expertise AI and see what it generates. What I can tell you as a SME is it's about 50 to 75% accurate, and then I gotta kind of make sure I look at what's not correct, or isn't my voice, or isn't taking into account maybe the considerations we have around other uses. So terrific tool, but should not be on its own answering questions without a smart person in the middle.
For folks that are interested in the specifics, they should look at the executive order from Governor Inslee, and they should look at some of these reports because they're the specifics of what you should and shouldn't put into these models, of how you can use them efficiently and effectively for benefit for folks, of questions around using them for first drafts or not, how they interact or create public records. So there's all sorts of pieces that were addressed in the executive order that are very specific and that touched on many different agencies at the state level. And it's just really, I won't say groundbreaking, but very important work for this glitter bomb that is all over. I mean, it's a great analogy because it's all over the place and it's very sparkly, and we like it until it's still stuck in our hair 3 days later or something. So that's a great place to look for the specifics, because sometimes the details are very important, and in this space it's important that people are involved in it, that the impacts are understood, or that the possible impacts before they adopt it are understood, and that they're following the law and that they're correct and accurate and those sorts of things. And that's, like, as you said, it's about responsible use. And so I'd go look at the work that Katy and Nick have done at the state.
And a lot of other agencies.
A lot of other agencies.
Yeah. All right, thank you all. I'm not seeing any questions in the question box. I promised around 10 minutes.
Yeah, we can just hand the mic.
Well, all right. I'll stand in front of class. My name is Sabrina Roach. I'm the statewide digital equity analyst in the Governor's Office of Equity. And I have a little bit of a request, actually. I'm looking for guidance and resources with some urgency. I'm getting requests from immigrant rights networks from across the state for data security advice for their organizations and accessible consumer privacy education tools and curricula for Know Your Rights trainings. And with Governor Ferguson's newest executive order on protecting immigrant families and responding to family separation, will the Family Separation Rapid Response Team include a surveillance self-defense education dissemination component? Is that an opportunity? And then broadly, with less urgency, like, where does this live within state and municipal government consumer education? I know the AG's office used to do that during a week, a year, and I think it's great that it's somewhat distributed across various departments and communication channels and direct service providers. I would love to see or be part of a coordinated, like distributed, but coordinated body of work on this. Thank you.
I think we are all responding to variations of that question. I think we'd like to probably take your information and make sure we continue to have this conversation about data and privacy and other aspects of the equitable access to information.
Yeah, and I love that idea in terms of how distributed some of the resources might be, and trying to centralize those a little bit better to make them more accessible for everybody. And I do work with Megan. We work, your director, and Office of Equity was a part of the executive order as well, with the accountability framework, which ties right into many of the issues that you were raising. And so I think especially around sensitivity to collection and use of immigrant data is going to be very important for the state to look at how that's collected and used. And it has always been a focus, but I think particularly right now we're concentrating on sensitive types of data.
So it's all happening right now. We don't have, I wish I had a handbook for you right now. That's not there, but if you want to be a part of building that handbook, I think that's something we should talk about.
Part of the body of work you're talking about, updating the questions from
Yeah.
nonprofits.
Of course, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I see cards. I see writing on cards happening for additional questions.
So as so as privacy and data professionals, what keeps you up at night?
What keeps you up at night?
HR, there are things that I think about that I don't think the average person is thinking about in terms of employment and things of that nature. Wondering, are there similar things with privacy and data that you say, you know what, the organization isn't thinking about these things, but we are, and I'm fearful of this.
We know what we know. So what I don't know is what keeps me up at night. In any organization, there's what we like to call shadow IT. Oh, I have a credit card. I can just go buy that thing. No one's going to notice. It's really not a problem. The work that we do at the city really doesn't leave us a lot of places where we shouldn't be concerned, not only about privacy, but about records retention, public records if somebody asks for something. So I have a hard time sleeping at night when I spend too much time worrying about folks that are not using the review process or find that cumbersome. And so not only do we have privacy and other issues around that, there's security concerns. Not all solutions have the security requirements we need or the compliance concerns. Operationalizing things and how they supported or not supported. My mother told me something true that I have carried with me, and I will share with you, and you can see if this makes sense in your life. A lot easier to get into things than it is to get out of them. So we're the back end of somebody got into something, and now we got to dig our way out if there are issues that were not considered at the time of acquisition. So stuff I don't know, credit card purchases, we're not aware of. It happened. It's out there, and it's dealing with our stuff. And I will probably not sleep well tonight as I think about that a little bit more. But that's really it, what I don't know, what we aren't able to review and know about.
I think that's a similar theme for us, where we still, as much as we've tried, and thank you, for there being International Privacy Day and people caring and interested in the topic, we still are a little bit working to get ourselves included, especially in big projects, right? That's a real issue where I hear that from all different levels of privacy professionals, is that I could have helped with this issue that happens later that you find out about if I had been brought into the project sooner. And so I think that continues to be an area where we're trying to raise awareness and then trying to make sure everybody understands that there's a value add to having these conversations when you're especially building new technologies, because rework is very expensive and time consuming, and especially being sensitive to all of the new laws and regulations and ideas about how data should be collected and used. Having those conversations earlier in projects is really where I still try to make sure we're at the table.
And I'm going to add one other caveat that some of us remember when you just weren't home. Do you remember that? When you just weren't home. You got to call back, right? We've gone into a space with the younger generations that have always been connected, always online, and have an idea that there is no privacy. Everybody's got everything anyway. Well, when you bring that to the workplace, that makes it difficult to make sure they're connecting to professionals around issues of data privacy, availability, open, all the things. So I worry about, that does keep me up at night sometimes too, the evolution or lack of concern in personal privacy that people may bring into the world. Like, please check your privacy settings on everything. But that worries me, and bringing that into the professional world where that can have an impact in the work we do.
Okay, we have time for maybe one more.
Well, I'll ask quickly. Thank you so much for the information you shared today. You talked all about your principles in privacy and kind of foundation for your different programs. with the introduction of AI, specifically generative AI and all the work that you've done around policy, did you find that your privacy principles were flexible enough to be applied to AI as a processing of personal information or data, or did you make updates to them as you applied privacy principles to that type of processing?
Yeah, I'm going to try really quickly. I have realized that I'm not sure if without the mic, the voices carry appropriately. So I'm going to try to just regurgitate a little bit. Speaking a lot about the privacy principles, programmatically that we have we found since AI came around that our privacy principles are flexible enough to be adaptable to address any kind of issues around AI, or are they, have they needed to be updated, or a generation of new principles specific around AI? Is that?
And because
Okay,
she
great.
was so involved in this, I can tell you, we did have to add. So general data privacy covers a lot, but then there are other things like person in the middle, bias concern, things that AI can do and generate that go a little beyond just the data privacy. So it's data privacy plus some specific things to that technology. And so if you go on our website, take a look at the Responsible AI program, you'll see what Sarah crafted so carefully around specifically accuracy, some other things that we do around AI.
Yeah, and for us too, it's a yes and. So we have our privacy principles, but we also we haven't formally adopted. We have them in the interim guidelines. The AI principles that we basically got from NIST with the added one. Sorry, the NIST National Institute of Standards and Technology AI Risk Management Framework. But we also added public purpose and social benefit for us for an additional principle for the state, just because. For government, that's an additional principle that we wanted to be added to our AI pieces.
Okay, I'm just kidding. I know we have like 1 minute over, but I did see one more question. Do you want to go ahead and ask?
So, as a technology partner supporting many municipalities, cities, and state agencies, what's your vision in your technology partners that you work with throughout the year on how to best align with the frameworks you've put in place? Now, you've answered a few of them, right? Like the websites, the privacy websites. But like you say, you're worried about the person who's swiping the credit card. What is your vision on how best your partners can support your initiatives around the framework, data, AI, and the future of technology?
So we love our vendor partners. They can get our clients really excited about solutions before we've had a chance to say, and there's a privacy program, there's a security requirement. If it has AI in it, we should have a conversation about how that works. So I think it's ensuring that there is a conversation that includes information technology before we get folks too excited about any one solution. It's funny, I think when we were doing a lot of work with intelligent cities or smart cities technologies, we would have folks that had developed products for the private sector without consideration for how that transfers to the government world. And because of open records, because of public records, because of privacy, because of security, because of critical infrastructure and some of the things that are unique to government, some of those products and approaches don't translate exactly. So it's being smart about the laws, being smart about the connection back to working with information technology and understanding that we're really fast forwarding on a lot of technologies, but we also have a lot of really old stuff that we have to support because that's the only thing that works to run certain programs or certain services we offer. And it can be a really interesting and varied environment. So taking a little time, and it takes longer to sell to government for a lot of reasons, but one of them is making sure that we can't really do the bleeding edge. We need to kind of make sure that whatever solutions we look at work with our environment.
And that's a question that my boss, the state CIO, usually gets. So I'm going to stick to his talking points on this one because I have heard him give this answer several times. So something that he likes to emphasize for our technology partners is that it's not so much a one and done anymore. It's not going to be we're just a one-stop solution to solve all of our problems. It's the expectation that our partners work with us and then with other partners as well to help integrate systems and work well across the enterprise and work together to achieve the state's strategy, and then being familiar with the state's technology strategy and how we're trying to build projects that can kind of go the distance and then also be agile and updatable along the way. So that's sort of the vision that he shares.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you all. That ends our panel this evening. So thank you, panelists. And thank you all so much for coming. Always reach out, email, website, seattle.gov/privacy, and website.
Yeah, and you can email us. I think it's privacy@watchtime.org.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for coming. Happy Data Privacy
Thank you
Day.
for the time. It's good to meet you all.